All right, let's dive into something we all do every day, probably without even thinking about it. Greetings.
And we're going even deeper by looking at them in two languages, Hindi and English.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think of it as your guide to not just what to say, but, how to say it, to make a killer first impression.
It's amazing how much greetings reveal about, well, respect, formality, and the whole relationship between the people talking.
It's like they're these tiny little cultural time capsules,
That's
right?
exactly.
So it's way more than just like memorizing phrases from some tourist phrase book.
Right.
Okay, so let's kick things off with formal greetings. Namaste with the hands together. I've always thought it's such a beautiful, versatile greeting.
It is.
But is it really like the right choice for every single formal situation?
That's a good question. Namaste is super interesting because it's deeply rooted in Indian spirituality, that whole idea of two souls meeting.
I see.
And while it's widely used and respected, some formal situations need a little more oomph. For example, when you're welcoming a client, you could say, Namaste, aapka swagat hai.
Aapka swagat hai.
Yeah, which basically means welcome, but it just adds that extra layer of warmth and hospitality.
Oh, that makes sense. It's kind of like choosing the right outfit, right?
Exactly.
Like it wouldn't show up to some fancy gala in jeans.
Yeah.
So you've got to, tailor your greetings to the level of formality.
Yeah.
What about when we have to be super careful about showing respect, like when you're talking to elders or people who are, higher up?
Oh, yeah. Then your word choice and even your tone of voice becomes super important. In Hindi, you often use those honorifics like G after someone's name to show respect. Sort of like, using sir or ma'am in English. But the thing is, the level of formality in Hindi is often even more intense than what we're used to in English.
Wow. So even if I'm, totally fluent in both languages, I can still mess up if I'm not paying attention to those little cultural differences?
Exactly.
That's kind of intimidating, but also super fascinating.
It is. And it shows why just translating phrases isn't enough, right?
Yeah.
We need to understand that deeper cultural context.
Right.
Think about phone conversations. In a formal setting, you might start with Namaste minyor, your name bol rahahun, main apki ka madad kar sakta hun. It sets the super respectful tone right off the bat,
Right.
even though you're not face to face.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a mouthful compared to just like, hello, this is your name.
Right.
It seems like Hindi puts way more emphasis on being polite and formal.
It really does. And that's where being culturally aware is so important. By understanding these little nuances, you avoid making those embarrassing mistakes.
Right.
But you also show real respect for the culture. But let's be honest, sometimes we need to loosen up a little.
Right.
What about those casual hangouts with friends or family? What are some fun, informal ways to greet each other in Hindi?
Yeah, I love that idea of adding a little fun into it.
Right.
I've heard kya hal chal, which is so charming. What's the cultural story behind that phrase?
Kya hal chal literally means, what's the movement?
What's the movement?
But it's basically a playful, what's up?
Yeah.
It reflects this Indian concept of masti, which is all about lighthearted fun and really enjoying life. And you'll often hear it with smiles, laughter, that sense of warmth.
So it seems like it's more about that feeling than the literal translation.
Exactly. It's capturing that feeling of being close and connected, which is huge in Indian culture. You're acknowledging not just that they're there, but also how they're doing. Another one you might hear is Uriyar, which is hey, buddy. It's super endearing, often used between close friends.
Okay, RER.
Yeah.
That one's definitely going in my back pocket for those laid-back hangouts.
Yeah.
What about when you're with family? Does it get kind of blurry between formal and informal?
Such a good question. Family dynamics add a whole other layer.
Right.
So while Hindi does have specific terms for each relative, aunt, uncle, lots of people just use mom and dad even when they're speaking Hindi.
Mom and dad?
Yeah. It's this beautiful blend of culture showing how language adapts to personal relationships.
It's so cool how some things just go beyond language. I'm curious, are there any informal greetings in Hindi that are so unique they just can't be translated directly into English? Those phrases that really capture the essence of a culture.
Oh, totally. One that comes to mind is Aryar Keso. It goes deeper than just asking, how are you? It's a really heartfelt question showing real concern and a desire to connect on a deeper level. It sums up that warmth and hospitality that's so typical of Indian culture.
It's amazing how a simple greeting can carry so much cultural meaning. It really reminds us that communication is so much more than just knowing the words.
Right.
It's understanding the feelings and values behind them. But before we get too carried away with all the hellos, we should probably talk about, how to say goodbye in a way that doesn't ruin everything.
You're so right. Knowing how to leave a conversation gracefully is just as crucial as knowing how to start it. You don't want to fumble at the finish line after a great first impression.
Right.
Exactly.
So, how do we navigate those farewells? What are some formal ways to say goodbye in Hindi that leave a lasting good impression?
Okay, so imagine you're leaving the office. You could say, Achaji, apmin chaltahun, apka din shupo.
Aapka din shupo.
Yeah, which means, all right, I'll take your leave now. Have a great day. It's polite, respectful, and sends them off with those good wishes.
I love how aapka din shupo is like a little blessing. Now, what about after, let's say, a business meeting?
Oh, yeah.
How do you end things formally but still stay professional?
After a really good meeting, you might say, yeah, bachid bahut upyogirahi alvida,
Yeah.
which means this discussion was very useful. Goodbye.
Mm,
It acknowledges how valuable the talk was while keeping that formal tone.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got leaving the office, we've got after the meeting. What about those formal emails,
Oh, right.
Are there specific phrases that are like good etiquette in both Hindi and English?
For sure. In a formal email, ending with dhanyavad, your name, is very common.
Dhanyavad.
Yeah, which essentially means thank you, your name. And in English, best regards, your name, is standard formal.
Dhanyavad and best regards. Got it. Those little sign-offs are like the, I don't know, like the bow on a present.
Yeah,
But we don't always have to be so formal, right?
right.
What about those informal goodbyes, the ones we use with friends and family?
Oh, that's where the real fun is. Informal farewells in Hindi are so expressive. For example, with friends, you could say, Shalbai, milte hain, bye-bye.
Wait, chalba? Milte hain, bye-bye. That is such a great mix of Hindi and English. It totally captures that, casual code switching thing you hear in multilingual groups.
It does, right. It's like you're already looking forward to the next hangout.
Exactly. It's all about that warmth and connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like saying, all right, bro, catch you later in English.
Okay.
But with that added, Indian twist.
Exactly.
Okay.
Fair.
All right, bro, catch you later. I love it. It seems like even with goodbyes, those cultural nuances are still super important. What about saying goodbye to family? Are there any specific informal farewells that are common in Hindi?
If you're heading out in the evening, a simple, Mom, I'm heading out, see you in the evening, works just fine.
Okay.
Straightforward and conveys your departure. And if you're with a group of friends, a casual, okay, bye, see ya, works in both Hindi and English.
Okay.
It's all about keeping it light and relaxed.
Simple and sweet, just like those universal mom and dad greetings. It seems like some expressions just work no matter what language you're speaking. But even though we've covered a lot, both formal and informal, I have this feeling there's more to it than just, memorizing a bunch of phrases. Like there's another level of understanding we need to reach.
I think you're absolutely right. The real takeaway is that it's not just about the words, but about understanding the context and choosing the right words for the right situation.
Okay, so let's break down this idea of context.
Yeah.
It sounds like mastering bilingual greetings is more about social smarts than just vocabulary, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Think of it like this. You wouldn't wear a tuxedo to a casual backyard barbecue, right?
Right.
Same way you wouldn't use super formal language with close friends or family.
That is a great analogy. It really shows how language is a tool, and just like any tool, it has to be used the right way for the job.
Exactly. And our source material puts it perfectly. Choose your words based on the person and situation to make your conversation effective and respectful. It's all about creating that, harmony and understanding.
That reminds me of this time I was in India. I accidentally used a super formal greeting with a group of friends.
Yo.
They all started laughing and teasing me for being too proper. It was funny, but it taught me a big lesson about reading those social cues.
That's a perfect example of how even a tiny slip-up can show us how important cultural awareness is.
Right.
And it sounded like your friends were cool about it.
They were. And it made me realize that learning a language is about more than just textbooks and grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's about embracing the messy human side of communication, making mistakes and, making stronger connections.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect thought to keep in mind as we keep exploring Hindi and English greetings. Now, before we move on to part 2 of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a little challenge. Imagine you're about to meet someone new from a different culture. How would you greet them? What things would you consider to make sure you're being respectful and engaging? Think about that as we get ready for the next part of our exploration. Welcome back to our deep dive into Hindi and English greetings. I hope you've had some time to think about that challenge, greeting someone from a different culture.
It's definitely been on my mind. It seems like choosing the right greeting is like just the beginning. There's this whole deeper level of cultural awareness that we have to think about.
You're right. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. It's not just about the words, it's about understanding the values and social rules that are like built into a culture. For example, we talked about how important formality and respect are in Indian culture.
Right.
But how does that actually play out in, everyday interactions?
Well, we touched on using honorifics like jishi and those more elaborate greetings in certain situations. But I'm curious, are there any other little things that we might miss, as people who aren't native speakers?
Oh, definitely. One really cool thing is nonverbal communication. In India, gestures and body language are so important for showing respect, like slightly bowing your head when you greet an elder, or even touching their feet as a sign of reverence.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Even a simple namaste can mean different levels of respect depending on like what you're doing with your body. It's like this secret language within a language.
Exactly. And that's where paying attention is key. Watching how people interact, noticing their body language and tone of voice, it can teach you so much about the culture.
It's like being a detective.
Right.
Trying to figure out those unspoken rules. Speaking of unspoken rules, I imagine there are some greetings and farewells that are like totally off limits in Indian culture.
Yeah.
Are there any things we should avoid doing to make sure we don't accidentally offend anyone?
That's a really good point. While Indian culture is generally pretty forgiving, there are definitely a few things to remember. For example, calling someone older than you by their first name without their permission is a big no-no. It's always better to be more formal until they tell you it's okay to be casual.
So when in doubt, go with respect and formality. That's good advice for anywhere you go, really. Now, I want to talk about something we saw earlier, code switching. Like that casual goodbye, chalabai, milte, and bye-bye.
Yeah.
It's like blending two languages together in one phrase.
Code switching is so cool, especially in places like India where there are so many cultures. It's this natural flow between languages that can be used to create a sense of closeness or, emphasize something.
It's like you're picking the best tool for the job. Sometimes a Hindi word captures a feeling perfectly, or you might use some English slang to sound cool.
Right, and it's not just single words either. Sometimes whole sentences are mixed with both languages. It shows how flexible and creative language can be.
It's like weaving a tapestry, right?
Yeah.
Combining different threads to create something richer and more interesting.
I like that. And the cool thing is, this code switching isn't just for casual settings. You hear it in professional situations too, especially in fields where English is common.
So it's not seen as like unprofessional to use a bit of English in a Hindi conversation, even in business.
Not at all. In fact, it can actually help communication, especially when you're dealing with, technical terms or ideas that are easier to explain in English. It's about finding that balance and being aware of who you're talking to and the situation you're in.
Context. It seems like that's the key takeaway from our deep dive today.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing the words, but knowing when, where, and how to use them right.
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us back to our challenge from earlier. When you meet someone from a different culture, it's not enough to memorize some phrases.
Right.
You have to approach that interaction with curiosity, a willingness to learn, and real respect for their culture. It's about realizing that every interaction is a chance to, broaden our horizons and connect with people. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with another thought. Think about a time when you had a cultural misunderstanding. Maybe it was about language, or maybe it was about social customs. How did that experience change how you think about cultural awareness?
Think about that as we get ready for the final part of our exploration. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of Hindi and English greetings. I'm curious, did that challenge about thinking about a cultural misunderstanding make you think of anything interesting?
It did, actually. It reminded me how much we just assume things based on our own culture.
Right.
Even something as simple as a greeting can cause all sorts of problems if you don't get the nuances.
It's like walking through a minefield of awkwardness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it sounds like those mistakes can also be really good learning experiences.
Absolutely. They push us to get out of our comfort zones and question what we think we know.
They show us how important empathy and listening are when you're communicating with people from different cultures.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, but about being sensitive enough to realize when you might be breaking them without meaning to. We've talked a lot about the differences between Hindi and English greetings.
Yeah.
But are there any, universal rules for greetings that work no matter where you are in the world? Those golden rules that apply to everyone.
That's a great question. While the specific customs might be different, I think there are some basic principles that are true everywhere. Sincerity, for one.
Okay.
A real smile and a warm tone of voice can do wonders for showing good intentions, no matter what language you're speaking.
It's like that saying, people might forget what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. A sincere greeting can create a positive connection that goes way beyond words.
Exactly. Another universal principle is respect.
Right.
Showing respect to elders, using the right titles, and being mindful of personal space, those are all signs of respect that everyone understands.
So it's about recognizing those core human values that connect us no matter what our background is.
We're almost at the end of our deep dive, but I want to go back to something you said earlier. The power of nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
We talked about gestures and body language in India, but how can we get better at noticing these nonverbal cues in any interaction with someone from a different culture?
Observation is key.
Hmm.
Pay attention to how people use their hands, their eyes, their posture to express themselves. Notice the subtle changes in their tone of voice and facial expressions.
Right.
Often, those nonverbal cues tell you way more than words ever could.
It's like learning to read between the lines.
Yeah.
Understanding that unspoken language of human interaction. It takes practice, but it can be so rewarding.
It really is, and the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
You start to develop a natural feel for those cultural nuances, and your communication becomes smoother and more genuine. It's like fine-tuning your cultural radar, picking up those subtle signals that help you make those deeper connections. Before we say our final goodbyes, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought.
Okay.
We've explored Hindi and English greetings, but what we've learned goes way beyond these two languages.
Yeah.
The next time you meet someone from a different culture, approach them with curiosity, a willingness to learn, and real respect for their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
You might be amazed by the connections you make and the things you discover.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, I'll say goodbye with a heartfelt Dhanyavad. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of language.
Until next time, Milte Hain. Bye-bye.